Hi everyone, this is Lori from My File Addiction. In this tip video, we are going to go over different ways that you can resize pre-stone fonts. Sometimes what we want to use, maybe too small or too large for the wording that we are putting together. So I'm going to show you a couple of different options you have for resizing that lettering. And sometimes, depending on how close you are to it being the size that you need, will kind of determine whether or not it's going to, work overall. But sometimes they say if you're within maybe a couple of inches, it might be worth trying this out to see if it's going to work. But you can't take a 12-inch design and try to shave off about 3 or 4 inches. That's going to be it might be a little impossible to do, or too much work, so you might as well start from scratch kind of thing. But yes, there are a couple different ways to resize lettering. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a library, and I'm going to bring up one of the fonts that I set up as a master file. So in one of my previous tip videos, tip number 6, I talked about the differences between working with pre-stoned lettering that is a typable font and one that comes as an SVG. So I sell the SVG, and you can you can set up a master file for that by saving it to your Silhouette library. And I talked about when we make adjustments to lettering, what you can do is you can update your master file, and any letters that we've made changes to that possibly you might be able to use later on, you could save in your master file, and this way you won't ever have to make those changes again. So that's kind of a plus over working with typable fonts, because typable fonts, yes, you can change them. You can do exactly what I'm going to show you to do. However, every single time you typed out that word, it's going to automatically default back to the original size that the designer made it. So you would have to turn around and make any modifications to that letter again, if that's what needed to be done. So that's kind of some pluses and minuses between the two. So, and believe it or not, when I go into my font files, I have a whole slew of changes that are just all over. Mine do not, this is clean compared to what my files look like. Also, a lot of times what I'll do is when I'm building the word, I build it in my master file. If it's a common word that I may use sometime, even if it's too large for my design, I will save it in there, because if I ever go back and I have to try to figure out if I can use that font for that word again, that word is right there already built and put together, and either I just copy and paste it, or I check the size, see if it's what I need, and so it kind of creates a little shortcut for me too. So, but you can do what's best for you. So I am going to click on my letters. Now your master file, if you set it up, if you happen to be using the SVG letters, always make sure that you're going to just copy and paste, okay? Your master file should contain all of your letters. If you start pulling and then you put your word together and then you copy and paste into another tab, then you save this file, it no longer will have those letters in it. So I like to just copy and paste everything. So you can either select all your lettering at one time. So you could do, I'm going to type out bride. So I'm going to select the R, the I, the D, and the E, and I'm just holding down my shift key, and then I can select copy, and then I can select paste, and I have a duplicate of all those letters. Okay, so that's a shortcut. My R is down a little bit low here, but I'm just going to pull these letters and I'm going to put them together. And I am going to zoom in, and I do that by holding down my Alt key and using my little wheel on my mouse here. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of adjust these just to kind of see where I'm at. And then I am going to bring up this, I have my transform panel opened. I'm going to select all my lettering. I'm going to line it to the bottom. It lines everything up perfectly. And now I've put together my word. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to now copy and paste, because this word bride could be something, especially in this type of lettering, it may be a word that I want to use again. So I'm going to leave it at its original state before I make any changes to any of the letters. Okay. So I'm going to select it, and I am going to copy, and I'm going to open up a new page, and I'm going to select paste. Okay, so now we have it on a new tab here. I am going to close out that. I'm going to close out that, and okay, so we have options here. Your first option is, okay, so we're going to select the size of this, and it's 7.117 inches wide. Okay, so say that was a little too wide, and say we were looking for something more around, I'm just going to say around the 5-inch mark. Okay, we'll see, and I don't know what this is going to end up being, but we'll just try to see how this turns out. Okay, so say we wanted this to be 5 inches instead of 7 inches. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to copy and paste and keep my original over here. I've mentioned in a lot of my tip videos, I am a big fan of copying, pasting, and keeping an original, and then if we need to go back to it, it's right there. Okay, so better to do that and then having to do undos, or go back into the letter file and get the letters again and that kind of stuff. So okay, so the first option you have is, if this is going to be too large, you can reduce the word down to a smaller stone size, or you can, this is an SS10. Okay, so these circles are sized for an SS10 stone. So you can reduce it down to where the circles shrink to make them an SS6 stone. Or you could increase it if you wanted a bigger word, but you would have to increase the size of the design for it to be the correct size holes for an SS16 stone. Okay, so as you increase and decrease the size of this design, those circles, see how they get so much smaller? Okay, this is probably the most commonly asked question is, can I just shrink this down to any size that I need? Well, no, you can't, because those circles have to be a certain size. Okay, so that's why I said you can shrink the design down or increase it, but it has to be where the circles match for the stone size that you're going to use. So you can't necessarily shrink a design like this, like I'm doing, and still be able to use an SS10 stone. Okay? And you can't take this design and you can't do something like this, because if you zoom in and you look at those circles, they are no longer round anymore. Okay? So whatever you function you're doing is changing the size or the shape of the circles. Only when you are in the rhinestone design mode is when you can increase and decrease in this program, and it will also increase and decrease the amount of circles. Okay? But once you are out of it, or if you are working with somebody else's artwork, it no longer increases and decreases the number of circles. It changes the size or the shape of the circles, if that makes sense. Okay? So I am going to delete this and just kind of go back to my original. So I think it would be easier than trying to figure out what the correct size was. Okay, so here is our SS10. Actually, I'm going to make 3 copies of this. Okay, if you are starting with a design that is SS10, and the way you can tell that is we want to break this apart so we can see the individual circles. Okay, so if I select it and I right click on it, left click on it, and I select release compound path, now you can see all of those individual circles have been selected because they have little boxes around them. So this is broken apart now. Okay, where before these are actually all the circles for that letter have been grouped. Okay, so an SS, to cut a hole for an SS10, the circles have to be 0.13 inches. So you can see your measurement here, or you can go up to the top and you can see your measurements at the top here. So what we can do now is we can decrease the size of this design down to an SS6 stone size. So if you were flexible and you wanted to use a smaller stone, and sometimes that's what needs to be done, I'm going to break these apart, this one. I have a percentage here. So if we bring up our transform panel here, there's the second option, which is like a diagonal arrow. Okay, you have it up here too, but this one you have to actually click on the preset percentages. But if you go to this panel and click on that, you can put in your own percentage here. Okay, so if you are starting with circles that are 0.13 inches, you can put in, if you want to change this design and make it for an SS6 size, which my circles would be 0.098 inches, I can type in 74.5%, hit apply, and it shrinks that design down. Okay, so now if I deselect and I select one circle, the circles are now 0.098 inches. Okay, that's the size for an SS6 stone. So this design would be about 5.366 inches, and but it also has made it shorter. Okay, so the original design was a little over 2.5 inches, 2.645. Now it has taken the entire design and it shrank both the width and the height. Okay, so to keep those circles round, it has to shrink it equally. So now, you know, the design is 1.994 inches tall by 5.366 inches wide. Okay, so that's one option. So say you had a bride that wanted a bigger design. and you were willing to go to an SS16 stone. Okay, so you would type in, let's see in my note, 133%. Hit apply, and now it has increased the size of that design. And I'm going to move these down just so I can move this down a little bit. And I think I forgot to break this one apart, so I need to release our compound path. And now if I select a circle, it's 0.173 inches, which is the size for an SS16 stone. Okay, so that is one way of changing the size of a design. And you can do this with fonts. You can do this with if you bought a design from a shirt design and you wanted to change it to bigger or smaller, you could do this. But if you do it, do your entire select all of your pieces at one time. Don't do one at a time. When we separate those pieces as a designer, it's like putting together a puzzle. If you accidentally change the size of one puzzle piece or one of those template pieces, and you make it and it's not exactly the right size, and you make changes to the other ones and they're not exact, you could have a hard time putting those pieces back together. Okay, but if you resize everything at one time, just like I resized all of this lettering at one time, I didn't do one letter at a time, I did the entire word. You need to do that so the entire design is being made smaller or larger at the same exact time. Okay, it's very important that you do that. Okay, so this is one option. So our next option would be to actually want to, and you know what, quite frankly, what I would do is, because this is bride in a few different sizes, I would make a copy of this. You can actually even cut it because we don't really need it. I would go back to my master file here, and I would hit, let's see, if I hit paste, I'm not sure. I might have to, let's see, Control V. I'm going to see where it pastes at. Okay, so it's still selected. So make sure if it overlaps your letters, what I would do right at this point is I would do Control G. I would group those. That way, if you accidentally deselected, it's not ruining your letters. You can move everything, and I would put it in here. Okay, so now you could say, I have an SS6 version, I have an SS10 version, and I have an SS16 version of this word in case I ever need it. Or you could make a master bride file of different ways and different fonts you use for the word bride and copy and paste it in there. You now have that word set up 3 different ways. Okay, if that makes sense. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to this one. Okay, so say we wanted SS10 stones. We did not want to go with any other stone sizes, but we really still need this design to be smaller. We don't want it to shrink in the height. We only want to shrink the width. Okay, so I'm going to kind of show you how I would go about doing that. Again, I'm going to make a master copy, and actually I'm going to make 2 copies. This one I'm going to group, and one I'm going to change it to another color. Okay, this one I'm going to break apart, and by releasing my compound path, I want individual circles now because I am going to edit the letters. So this particular word here, if we did not know what font was the original font that the designer stoned from, we can use our pre-stone lettering as a guide. Okay, what I would do is, okay, so say we want to shrink this and we want to shrink it down to 5 inches. Okay, so this, it might be a little bit of a stretch to try to do it that way, but we'll see how close we can get. Okay, so obviously you're gonna try to compress that lettering together. Okay, so the problem with compressed lettering is it doesn't give us a whole lot of space sometimes to do keep the same thickness of the lettering. So that is going to be our challenge here because we're trying to remove 2 inches. Okay, so that's why I'm not quite sure if it's going to work. Also, another thing is when you compress it too much, if you noticed, these letters are on a slant, okay, but when you compress it, if you look at these, it's like the letter D, it starts kind of getting more straight up and down. So we have to be mindful of that too, because we can make some edits, but if we're leaving some, you may end up with lettering that looks a little straight up and down, and some of them look slanted a little bit. So sometimes editing script fonts can be a little bit more of a challenge than editing an Arial type traditional style letter, that's something that's straight up and down. Okay, so okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use this now as our guide in order to try to change some of our lettering and edit the letters to try to make them smaller. So I'm going to take this and I am going to actually, this is the reason I put it behind it, but I'm actually going to right click on it, and I'm going to put send to back. Okay, so now I want that lettering to be kind of as my guide. Okay, it's not going to be perfect, but let me see here. You know what I think I'm going to do? What I think I'm going to do is one letter at a time. We're going to try this as one letter at a time. So it might be easier visually for you guys to see. So I'm going to select this letter E, and I probably should have okay, probably, I think what I'm going to do here, okay, I'm going to back up a little bit here. Just be easier to do this. Go back to this one. Oops, don't want that. Delete. Okay, it's easier to select the letters one at a time when they're all grouped together. So I don't want to ungroup anything until I'm ready to actually, oops, sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to select this E and I'm going to bring it down here. Okay, I think 5 inches is going to be, wait, let's try doing 5.5 inches. Yeah, I think 5 inches for this one is going to be a little too much for some of these letters. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is you're going to kind of pick a side. Okay, so I'm going to line both my E's up to the left because I want to actually try to shave off and make the letter shorter. So I'm going to try to remove from the right side of the letter E, okay? So since this is grouped, I don't have to worry about if I release this, that these circles are going to be, combining or sitting on top of each other. This is one solid piece, okay? So now if I take this and I release my compound path, now I am going to try to reform my E based on the red E that I see, okay? So I am going to take some of these circles here and I'm just going to reposition them. And you got to start somewhere, but sometimes you end up having to switch things around a little bit, but you got to kind of pick a spot. So these I'm going to see by moving these over to the left. Now I am actually creating this E that's going to be more, it's going to look more vertically up and down instead of having that slanted look. And that's what I said, sometimes when you're trying to condense a letter that was made to be slanted, this is where things could look a little wonky, but we don't know until we give it a try. Okay, so I'm going to delete some of these circles because obviously in order to make something more compressed or shorter, we have to remove circles, so we won't use the same amount of circles for a smaller letter E. Okay, bring this around and try to form this E, and that's what I did. Okay, so now by looking at the original letter E, which I'm going to bring that down, I'm going to bring that so you can kind of see it. Now there isn't really going to be the space to do this, okay? So this made it look a little thicker on this side, and then there was thickness over here. So we may have to change the look of the E, only because if you try to do that same thing, there's just not going to be enough room in here. And when your circles are too crowded, I'm going to kind of show you. Okay, so that's one option. That's adding it, and keeping it kind of similar to that one. So that one didn't turn out as bad as I thought it was going to. Or another option you can do is you can just take this and just add the entire thickness. You have to adjust all these stones here. And I'm going to zoom in closer because sometimes it's just easier when you're zoomed in to have more control over moving these stones around. And this would be a second option. Okay, so you have a letter E like this. Actually, these are too close. To shift all these down a little bit. Actually, I think that this needed to be brought out a little bit to blend it better, a little bit better too. Okay. So here's the second option. Okay, so we do have options for the letter E. And quite frankly, this one needs to be Okay, so this is the original. So as you can tell, we've kind of, it's not as wide, our two new versions aren't as wide. So I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw these two off to the side here, and we'll decide at the end what one looks better when we do the design, or when we put all the lettering together. This was that one, so I'm just going to delete that one only because I made modifications to this one. So I'm going to do shift group, and I'm going to do shift group. Okay. So our next letter here, we're going to take our letter D and see what we can do with that. So see now, if you look, it's like the D is more straight up and down when you smash it. I'm gonna try and see. I'm gonna line up this part of the D with the red line behind it, and I'm gonna try to see if I can still kind of keep the slanted part here at the top, and then I'm going to see if I can modify this part of it, and because we've got this empty space here that we probably could essentially move the left side of the D over and close that gap in a little bit, because there is that open space. When there's no space, then that is where the challenge would be, because you don't have any room to put anything. Okay, so this one I'm going to left click, release compound path, and I am going to delete this stone, and I'm going to delete this stone, and I'm going to try and select these and this stone, and I'm just going to try and shift them over right now. Now I want this, okay. So that's not going to work. I don't know if that's going to look right. But let's start here. I don't think that that's going to look right. But maybe at that point then we just start. It doesn't look right down here. This part's not too bad. I gotta deal with it. Okay, so I want it to kind of flow into that. I want it to flow into this line. So then these have to be just adjusted to. Scroll out. Now we probably, let me see here. Okay, so we've been able to condense this D a little bit. We probably could remove to remove probably change that and remove one of those. So I can bring that E a little bit closer to the D. So I am going to try and see if this one will work. So I'm going to hit Control G for group. And it may not work. Okay, so another option, because this is slanted, I don't think this E is going to, I don't know if that E is going to look way too close to it now. Another option we could do is we can take your little rotation here, and we could rotate that D just a little bit to try to mimic how it was. Yeah, see, now these lines line up a little bit more, so that might work a little bit better. Okay, so let's try that. Next letter is the letter I. The I, really, there's not a whole lot that we can do for the letter I, besides if you do, in this particular case, since we rotated the D, I would probably rotate the I a little bit, and actually, believe it or not, sometimes rotating it to make it more straight up and down will decrease the width of the letter also. Letters that are slanted will be wider than letters that are up and down. So if you took those slanted letters and you started rotating them, they would get less and less, the width would change, decrease, as you rotate that letter. So that's what I'm going to do with this letter I here. I'm going to just kind of rotate it a little bit, so that way it's kind of staying in the line of the rest of the letters being more straight up and down now, instead of being on a slant. Let me see here. Okay, so now I'm going to take my R and see if there's anything that can be done for the R. Okay, so I know I could remove a stone here, and I might be able to take this. I probably, again, would rotate this letter a little bit like this. Okay, and now I could probably bring this in a little bit more and shave off a little bit of the width. Okay, so I am going to compound path. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that extra stone. You could shift this up a little bit too. That decreases when it's farther out. It makes it wider, more straight up and down, decreases the width. Okay, this area I could probably modify just a little bit, and I could actually delete this stone, and then I could I might be able to grab all these, oops, it didn't grab that one, and move them all at one time. Okay. So now if I take this, I'm going to do Control G, group it, and I'm going to put it down with the rest of our letters here. see, it is quite closed in here. So now it starts, to me, you visually want to make sure that when you zoom out, that is going to look like an R, okay? So that's when you start closing in these letters, especially with script fonts, it makes them a little harder to read sometimes. So you cannot get too close and tight. I think Control-G, I'm going to ungroup that. I think I may, what I may do here, I'm going to select all these. What I think I might do here is rotate them a little bit and then come out just a tad to open that space up a little bit more. Okay, to me it kind of opened it up maybe just a tad. So again, it's how you visually see your designs too. But okay, I'm going to select those and I'm going to group it. Okay, now our B. So let's see where we are at as far as, you know what, first I'm going to do this. I'm going to see how. Okay, so we still are a little bit wider. If I line the R up, you can still see that the letter E is still beyond where the letter E was when we condensed that letter. So it is going to be tricky to try to even get it to 5.5 inches, okay? But we will try and see what we can do with this letter B. This is going to be the most work, this letter B, okay? So as you can see, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot that we have to change. So I don't necessarily want the look, personally, me. I don't necessarily want it to be really condensed looking in here. So because we have all this extra space over here, the first place I'm going to try to modify is just this loopy area and swirly area here, just because there's so much wasted space. Okay, this is going to have to be probably brought in a little bit too. It might not make a huge difference, but that'll be something we can do afterwards. So basically, we would have to, in order to try to make up for this overlap here, we would have to try and select our red design. We would have to try and shift that over, and our loop would have to come in that. We can't do that. So we are just going to have to take this as, it's going to end up being wider than we originally wanted it to be. But it's not going to be as wide as our original design. Okay, so sometimes we do have to accept that, we've done everything possible, but we still just can't make it work using the lettering that we wanted to use. Now, if we took this design down to a single row of stones, absolutely, you would not have any problem redesigning this with just one row of stones. But because we are doing the hybrid, we're doing the 2 rows and a single row, that those areas that there are 2 rows of stones, create a thickness. That's a thickness that it is what it is, and we can't, you know, 2 stones together is always going to take up a certain amount of space. So, like I said, we can only do so much here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to line up. I'm going to try to keep this part of the bee, okay? So we don't have to edit the entire thing. What I'm going to try to do, because I want to just try to edit this part over here, I'm going to try to line up this part of the bee. And again, we might have to rotate it just a tad. Oops, that's the wrong one. I'm going to rotate my black bee. I'd have to rotate it a little bit to mimic the way it is, okay? Because it's more straight up and down. And now I am going to right click, release compound path. And now I am going to just start selecting circles here. Okay, so these are following the path, so up until this point. Now we have to start redirecting them. So you can either, another faster way, you can either use the circles that obviously that are on your workspace, or if you select a circle, hold down your Alt key and just keep holding it down, and you can click on a circle and you can click, drag, and then if you want, and that'll duplicate it. And sometimes it's easier because you don't know how many circles are going to fit in the space. Actually, wait, this one needed to be changed over. Sometimes you don't know how many circles are going to fit in a space, and it's better to work towards a curve, because you can bring the circles in or out to take up the excess, or if you have tighter spacing, so it'll help you adjust your spacing. So see, I have the ability to move this one in and fill in that spacing. So obviously there's always have a curve, but that's just kind of a trick that I've learned that will help you out. Let's see, so I'm just gonna, oops, I forget. My program, I can hold down my delete button and just keep clicking on the circles. This program you can't. It will create these permanent imaginary boxes, and it throws me off sometimes, so I have to always make sure I backtrack. I don't know what it's doing, but those boxes are always in your way then. Okay, so now just to speed things along, I'm going to copy and paste. I'm just eyeballing my spacing. I've done this so much that I can get pretty darn close to the spacing that needs to be done. It may not be perfect, but oh, see, I just did it again. See, it leaves these boxes. So if I were to keep moving on, see, then it's doing this, and if I delete, so it's just kind of a weird thing that happens. So you have to delete, unclick. It's kind of a longer process, or you can marquee select too. Okay, so now we are kind of working on a curve here, so I need to join these two lines and kind of make them flow. You know, you want to be mindful of making sure you don't want to just connect the dots. You want to make sure it's it's flowing too. Okay. So now if I take away the red one, so now this is our modified version. Okay, so I see a few that I would need to adjust here. Again, and I've mentioned this before, if your eyes are drawn to a certain area, chances are it's an area that needs to be tweaked a little bit. Okay, don't be afraid to spend the time to tweak things. You know, I'm maybe a little bit more OCD than most people, but I like to zoom out and look at my designs and say, is it flowing really nice? Okay. I don't want to see broken lines. I don't want to see, stones. If a line is supposed to be straight, stones should be straight. Your stones should try to be as even as possible. You can always select a group of circles and you can respace them, okay? And that's where this transform panel comes in. You can horizontally and vertically respace stones by selecting a group of them. We sometimes have to do that. But, okay, so now, as you can tell, this is kind of it's changed the look of this a little bit, which, I could, too, also manually, I could have made maybe this loop a little bit smaller and brought this line down a little bit more, and it would have mimicked a little bit more of flowing like this. But I don't think that this one looks bad either. And this line coming out, I still think that there's plenty of room. It didn't interfere with the dot and the I. I'm still not 100% satisfied with the D. I think I would probably, I don't know. I think it's because it just, to me, it looks a little more too condensed. But if we Control Shift G, I ungroup that. I don't know, maybe if I move this down a little bit. Is what it is, it's just you're trying to condense it, so therefore it's going to look condensed. Okay, so this version now is 5.8, so our target was 5.5, so I'm a little over a 1/4 inch off of my goal. Again, I probably could shave that 1/4 inch if I decided to kind of manually come in here and tweak this. I could make the, like I said, I could make the loop a little bit smaller so then it could come around and come in a little bit more. So I could potentially get this down to 5.5 inches. Not the 5 inches that we originally talked about, but I was able to at least knock off, maybe what, 1.25 inches, roughly, almost 1.5 inches. So, I did think I did a pretty good job of doing that, and working with the lettering that I really 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 wanted to use. So that is my advice on trying to change up your lettering if you can. I'm going to show you how it's kind of a lot more easier when it comes to a more traditional style letter. So we're going to go to that now. So I am going to go into, this was an example that I used for my tip number 6 video here. And I'm going to go in and just delete this part. Delete that part. So we're going to take some of this lettering and I'm going to show you how you can make some changes to it. And to me, some of the letters, especially letters that have straight lines to them, you really don't sometimes need a visual guide like you would with the script letter. And so I had to create that bride and the one I created in red and put it behind those letters. Yes, for some of the, like if you're going to redo an E or the letter S or certain letters, yes, you probably could, but to me, I find it way easier to make modifications for lettering that is more of a traditional style just on my own, because it visually we know how it's supposed to kind of look. Okay, so with this particular lettering, okay, again, I'm going to make a copy of it just so we can compare everything. This one you have a few different options because we have some space available. Okay, so nothing is, you have enough for, a couple stones to fit in here. So when you have enough room for a couple stones to fit, you can at least reduce it down 1 stone. Okay, you can't reduce it down 2 stones, the width, because then these 2 areas would come together. Okay, but I know in this particular for this particular letter style that I know I could remove 1 row of stones for the width of each letter and I can bring this word down. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to take these and release my path. And I am going to, typically you want to try to release the stones all in a row. Okay, so I'm going to delete those, and then I'm going to take this part of the letter B and I'm going to bring it over to where it kind of lines up. So basically I'm going to line it up with this stone here. Okay, so these 3 stones are pretty close to being the same distance between this row that we did not move. So now what we would have to do is, now this is where we would come in and we would respace this row. Okay, so we want to respace those out. So we're going to go over to our transform panel and I'm going to respace them horizontally. Okay, same thing with this row. I'm going to fix this row, except for this one I'm going to stop at, why isn't it selecting it? There we go. I am going to select, I'm going to only do it to this row because I don't want these stones to shift. When you respace horizontally or vertically, the first and the last stone will stay in the same position that it's in. Okay, so these two stones will not move. Everything in between will shift. Okay, so if I went all the way to the end of this line, I would be shifting these stones over too, and I don't necessarily want that because I want these center stones here to remain all in the same row. Okay, so I'm just going to respace between these 5 stones. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Respace them. There you go. And because this one, see, this is a little bit different because this one to me belongs in this, it's not really necessarily lined up. It doesn't have to be lined up with these stones here. To me, I look at this part of the B, the top and the bottom 2 rows, as being the horizontal section of the B. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to respace those. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with the letter R. And I'm going to take these 2 out and these 2 out. Oops, that one. And I am going to, now, okay, so now with this R, you're going to see, if I were to move this over, I only have a little spacing here. So if I'm going to shift this over, all the way over to here, these stones are going to now overlap. So now with what I'm going to have to do probably with this R is, for sure I'm going to have to delete these 2 stones down here. And I am going to select these right now, and I'm just going to kind of see where I'm at after I move everything over. Okay, so that looks fine. You can, if these still were too close together, then another option would be to delete and change your R to like that. Okay, so I've seen where people have done that too. So you either have, the line the circles that would stick out here and be flat here, or you end up with 2 flat lines here. So I think either one would be fine. Let's just put it back right now. We can, after we zoom out, we can visually see what we want it to look like. Okay, so again, I'm going to only respace to that. And I'm going to go horizontal. So I am going to take that box and that box away. Okay, those are fine. Those are fine. These, I should respace these. And for sure respace these. Okay, so if you felt also after shifting this line over, if you felt that you could possibly add another stone, I don't think we can, but you can absolutely add another circle. You would do it like that, and then just select them all and respace them. And you know what, you probably could. That probably would work. So that means if we did it on that one, we possibly could do it on the letter B too. Okay, so yeah, I don't think, especially for if you're cutting on a your cameo cutter, um, your stones can sometimes be a little closer. Now, if you were a Cricut user, I would not add that in there because your program can't cut close holes. Okay, so the eye we are going to leave as is, but you absolutely, if you were tight on space, I would delete these two circles and I would delete these two circles and I would just make your eye straight up and down. Okay? Um, but right now, just for the sake of this video, I'm just going to leave them. Okay, so the D, we're going to do the same thing with the letter D. Just to make sure everything is hunky-dory. I just like to, and as you can see, even though they look like they were, when you're viewing this video, you'll see that I think this circle shifted a little bit, so they were not perfectly all spaced. Okay, so now there's that one. The E is going to be pretty darn easy because it's all straight lines, and this you're just going to basically move over. So that should be good. So now we are going to take our I am going to group all these letters because I don't want any shifting, and it's easier to grab the letters and move things around. Okay, so now I can just start dragging my letters closer together. And then if I take them, select them, line them to the bottom so they're all nice and straight on a straight line again. Now if we take and we look at the one above us, we were able to knock off 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4.5 rows. Actually, probably only 4 because, you know, I could probably bring in the spacing a little bit here. So see, we were able to kind of bring that down by 4 rows. We've knocked off. We took. Well, see, yeah, and actually, if you think about it, we took 1 row off of the E, we took 1 row off of the D, we took 1 row off of the R, and these didn't respace, and 1 off of the B. So that's 4 letters we've taken 1 row off, so we knocked off 4 rows of stones. So the I we never did anything to. Okay, so now if you have lettering like this, there's really not a whole lot. This one would be difficult because the spacing is just so tight, and I'm going to kind of show you. We could take some off of the E. So you could knock 1 row off of the E. Okay, so the lines don't have to be that length. You could easily take off those very end rows and just have a little bit E that's a little bit, you know, less wide. But the problem with the like the B and the R is, you know, there's just not a whole lot of open space here. So if you were to let's see, this one's not working. Release compound path. Oops. Control-Shift-G. Okay, so I just was okay, so I was able to do it. See if we release those or delete those, I'm sorry, and shift this over. So you end up with a B that looks like that, and it can get difficult to start seeing where those little openings are because you do have all this spacing that's between the stones, okay? So some of them, I don't know if I would necessarily try and reduce a letter like this down. Like I said, some letters, yes, you could do an L, you could do an F, you could do an E, because obviously you're just removing one row from the end. You definitely couldn't do anything because if you removed a row, now you only have 2 rows. The D might work, but again, you know, if I remove these stones, I bring this in, you know, D doesn't look so bad. So, but you know, like I said, it just kind of look at these letters. An M or an N would probably be very, very difficult in this particular style, with it being short and thick. You probably would find it difficult to redo any letters that have slants to them. Okay, that can be very tricky to try and alter. Okay, so let's go. So again, you know, like I said, these particular letters you would kind of do the same exact way. This one you could do the B. Couldn't do anything with the R. You couldn't do anything with the I. The E, there absolutely, because there's just no more room to condense that. The D, you probably could do that. You could probably, you know, remove these two and bring your circle in kind of like we did with, or your half circle like we did with the script D, and then reform your D. It would make it look probably not as round. It would be more oval type shape because you're just, you know, compressing and not necessarily condensing equally. You know, something like this, yes, you could do the D, but really, you know, none of these slimmer type letters you couldn't do. Okay, so let's go on the opposite end of the spectrum and say we wanted to, you know, we have a letter like this, but we wanted to make it maybe look a little thicker or wider. Okay, so you can take a single line font and sometimes you can add stones to it as long as you have the spacing. Okay, if this was a smaller, shorter version, when you start adding rows, like, oh, say for the letter E here, let's take this. Okay, let's ungroup these. I'm going to release compound path. Okay. With certain letters, certain letters, there's only a certain height that you can make them if you want to use more than one row of stones. Okay, you can only they can only be a certain height for as far as making them smaller. So a letter E here, if you think about it, okay, so you know what, I have, let me see something. Okay, that's already checked. I feel like I'm, every time my cursor touches a another stone, it's selecting it, and I don't like when it does that. So there's got to be some setting that got changed or something. But anyways, okay, so if I brought this down to this line right here, okay, and we wanted to make a letter E that had 2 rows of stones, you have to have room to at least skip a half of a line. Okay, you have to create a space between the 3 horizontal lines that make up the letter E. Okay, so therefore, if you're going to do that, you really, this is the absolute smallest that you could make this letter E as a as 2 rows of stones. Okay, just because I only used less than, because I didn't line this line up with these circles here. So it wasn't, I didn't leave a whole circle space between each. I left almost like a half of a circle. So that's it. So you can only make a letter E when 2 rows of stones only an inch tall. You can't make it 3/4. You can't make a half of an inch. There's just absolutely no room. Okay? If you tried to do that, you tried to say this isn't even 3/4. Okay, this is only 0.9. But if you had to shift that down to make this now basically your box, filled box. Okay, so you have to leave a certain amount of spacing. So you can only add thicknesses to letters of a certain height. Okay. But say if we wanted to add and make this a, say we wanted to make this a hybrid, where we wanted to look kind of thick, but then we wanted to have those thin lines too. Okay, so I call that a hybrid, where I'm using multiple rows of stones. You know, certain parts I'm using only 1 row of stones. Another area I might be using 2 rows of stones. Okay, so when you do that, and say we didn't really want to make this design any thicker than it is, okay, but we just wanted, we don't want to make it any wider. We just want to try to make it look thinner so it's not as thick. You can easily do that also. You can select the letters, or rows of stones, especially the straight lines. Select my Alt, and then I'm going to bring these in. Okay, and actually, if we do it something like this, and then while it's still selected, I hold down my Shift key, and I want to line it up with this row right here. So if I select this circle and I go to my horizontal, if I go to my align to right, it shifts those over. And then what we can do is select this whole row, and we can vertically respace it, and now it's perfectly lined up with this row. Okay, so we didn't make that B any wider, but now we made it look a little thicker. Okay, we can do the same thing with this row. Now this is a little bit different. This one is a little bit different because the R doesn't quite match up with any of the circles, okay? So right now what I'm going to do is I'm grabbing these stones and I'm going to shift them over a little. I'm going to hold my shift key down, select this circle at the top, align it to the right, and now what I'm going to do is I am going to select all of these, and I am going to respace them vertically, and now you can see it just kind of made this part of the R flow into that straight line. The I, yeah, you can just let's see, we can do, I forgot also another option to do is to go into our replicate panel, and we can go into the advanced section here, go into the bent arrow section at the bottom, and now where is my little cheat sheet here? Okay, now we can plug in, I think in my tip number 1 video, I showed you how to use the replicate panel and how the X and the Y will, depending on the numbers you put in, whether it's a positive number or a negative number, you can create a duplicate copy and offset to the right or left, up or down of the selected object. Okay, so you can do that with a group of circles also. So if I wanted to duplicate this I would select it. I would go to, I want to duplicate to the right, so that's going, I'm going to put a number in this X box, offset box. I want to duplicate it to the right because that's the space that I have available. Okay, so I'm going to put a positive number. My number is going to be my circle size, 0.13 inches, plus my spacing that I want to put between the two circles, okay? The two rows, I should say. And that's 0.025. So if I add those together, I get 0.155, okay? So if I type in 0.155 and I select replicate, now I have I've duplicated that straight line there. So you can do that on some of these like that too. I could select the inside of this D, and I could, since I already have it, I can hit replicate. I can select these 3 circles. I can select these 3 circles, replicate, and it brings it over like that. So now I have taken a single line font and I've changed it into a hybrid. Okay, so you have options like that. You know, if you needed this to be a little bit smaller, you could still shave off something like that, if that's what you needed to do. If you needed to bring in the D, you could bring in the D a little bit. You could delete, these 2 circles and bring this over. You could do the same thing with the B and the R, exactly, and we could make a smaller version of this. So let's do that real quick. I can take this word, and now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to show you one other way you could do this instead of one letter at a time, because this is kind of a straighter type lettering. So I am going to do this. I'm going to delete those, delete those, delete those. I'm not going, well, okay, I'll delete this. So now I'm going to select this, hold my shift key down, I'm going to select this part of the R, I'm going to select this part of the D, and now I'm going to shift them all over. Same time. Okay, so now I've created a shorter version of the same exact lettering. So now I've taken one font and essentially turned it into, and made it three. I've got three versions now. I have the single line, I have a hybrid, a single and a double, and now just by removing these letters, now I have made even a, this probably could be in a little bit more. Now I've taken even a, and I've made it even smaller yet. Okay, now if I had a master file of that, by having it as an SV, not an SVG file, if I saved it in my Silhouette library, now I could take all of these letters, copy and paste them into my original font that I started with, and now I'm creating these letters that I could possibly use for another design, and I would never have to remake them again. Okay, so anytime you have the option of creating a master file and you make any of these modifications, save your, save the original lettering. Obviously it would be in your master copy or your master file, but your new hybrid, the new word that you made out of those letters, copy, paste them, put them in that file, that master file, and then if you ever need them again, they're already made for you. You do not have to modify them again. So it's a lot of work in the beginning, but in the long run, I have, you can look at some of my fonts, and I have, 2 or 3 different versions of the same letter, because I've tweaked, and I said, oh, I can just move this one in a little, the circle in a little, this one out a little bit, and modified it for the design that I needed. And I'm like, oh, I might need to do this another time. So now I have options, and when I'm picking my lettering for my words that I put together, and when I see that I have made multiple versions, I grab all those versions, and then when I copy and paste and put that into a new tab, I bring all of those letters in there, and that way I have the ability to try different letters to see if just any of my modified letters that I already made can work. And you can do that with the script font too that I made. So just, save all of those letters, or save the whole, you can save the whole word too. You never know when you're, like I said, these common words, you could use again too. So let me see if I have missed anything, but I think I talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. Sorry again, my videos are long, but I just wanted to show you guys have options. You just kind of have to learn to think outside the box, and that's part of the process too. And that's not something always that can be taught. It's sometimes a lot of it's natural instinct, but by showing you guys different tip videos, hopefully it will say to your, by watching these, you will say, oh, I remember when Lori did this to modify this design in order to make it like this. Maybe I can take that tip and then you can apply it to whatever design you're working on. It doesn't even have to be necessarily lettering. You can modify anything. You literally could modify anything. You just need to be able to do exactly like I did with that first bride word, the script one. Take whatever you're trying to make and make a copy of it, group those circles together. That is going to be your copy that goes behind the copy that you are going to try and change. Okay? As long as you keep those circles at different colors so you can use that background and it stands out, you can try and reform that object and make it the way you need, whether it's larger or smaller. Okay? So it's just a little bit of hard work on your end, I guess, and you would be surprised at what you can actually do without having to, pay somebody to either remake it or, and have to pay for a second file. But you can take one file and you can modify things to the way you need them to be. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you can get notifications for future tip videos. Thanks for watching.